My name is Emma, and I'm 28 years old. I need to tell you about the most devastating betrayal I've ever experienced, and it came from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, my own parents. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. While my brother Jake, who's 25, was out partying and dropping out of college for the third time, I was working 2 jobs to put myself through nursing school. I graduated with honors, got a great position at the city hospital, and by 26, I was making more money than both my parents combined. Jake, on the other hand, had never held a job for more than 6 months. He lived in my parents' basement, played video games all day, and somehow convinced everyone that he was finding himself and just needed more time. More time, more money, more everything, but never any accountability. My parents, Linda and Robert, had always struggled financially. Dad worked construction until a back injury forced him into early retirement, and Mom worked part-time at a grocery store. They were proud people who had sacrificed everything to raise us, but by the time I started my career, they were drowning in debt. The wake-up call came on a rainy Tuesday evening in March. I was visiting for dinner when I noticed Mom crying over a stack of bills at the kitchen table. When I asked what was wrong, she broke down completely. "We're going to lose the house, Emma," she sobbed. "We're 3 months behind on the mortgage, and the bank sent a foreclosure notice." My heart shattered. This was the house where I'd grown up, where I'd studied for countless exams, where every Christmas morning had unfolded. The thought of my parents losing their home was unbearable. "How much do you need?" I asked immediately. Dad looked embarrassed. "Honey, we can't ask you to. I'm not asking, I'm offering." "How much?" They owed $47,000 on their remaining mortgage balance, plus the back payments and fees brought it to $52,000. It was my entire life savings, plus some, but these were my parents. The people who had worked multiple jobs to put food on our table when we were kids. "I'll take care of it," I told them that night. "I'll pay off the whole mortgage. You've done enough for us, now let me do this for you." Mom cried even harder, but this time with relief. Dad hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. "We'll pay you back every penny," he promised. I swear on my life, Emma, I believed him. Why wouldn't I? These were my parents. Over the next 2 weeks, I liquidated my savings account, cashed out my retirement fund early, taking a massive penalty, and even took out a personal loan to cover the full amount. On March 25th, I handed my parents a cashier's check for $52,000. The relief on their faces was worth every sacrifice I'd made. Mom hadn't stopped thanking me, and Dad kept talking about how they were going to start fresh, maybe even help me rebuild my savings once they got back on their feet. Jake, predictably, was nowhere to be found during this family crisis. When I asked where he was, Mom just shrugged and said he was going through a tough time and didn't need the added stress of their financial problems. I should have seen the red flags then. I should have questioned why their 25-year-old son couldn't even be bothered to support his parents emotionally during one of the hardest periods of their lives. But I was so focused on being the hero, on fixing everything, that I ignored my gut instincts. The first month after paying off their mortgage was blissful. My parents seemed lighter, happier. They invited me over for dinner twice a week and kept talking about their fresh start. Dad even mentioned maybe looking for part-time work to help rebuild their emergency fund. But then something changed. The phone calls became less frequent. When I'd stop by unexpectedly, they seemed nervous, like they were hiding something. Jake was suddenly around more often, but whenever I entered a room, conversations would stop abruptly. I started to feel like an outsider in my own family. The woman who had just saved their home was being treated like a stranger who might overhear something she shouldn't. The feeling in my gut grew stronger every day. Something was very, very wrong, but I had no idea just how wrong things were about to get, or how naive I had been to trust the people who were supposed to protect me. What I discovered next would change everything I thought I knew about my family forever. The first real sign that something was off came exactly 6 weeks after I'd paid off the mortgage. I was driving through town on my way to work when I saw something that made me slam on my brakes so hard the car behind me honked angrily. There, parked in the driveway of my parents' house, was a brand new silver Honda Civic. The temporary tags were still in the window, and it was gleaming like it had just rolled off the lot. My heart started racing. My parents had been driving the same beat-up Ford for 8 years. They'd always said they couldn't afford a car payment. So whose car was this? I pulled into the driveway and knocked on the front door. Mom answered, and the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. Guilt. Pure, unmistakable guilt. Emma, what a surprise. What are you doing here? Whose car is that, Mom? She glanced nervously toward the Honda. Oh, that's Jake's new car. The words hit me like a physical blow. Jake's new car? Jake doesn't have a job. Well, he's been really trying lately, and your father and you thought what? That you'd buy him a car with what money exactly? That's when Dad appeared behind her, and I could see the shame written all over his face. But instead of coming clean, he doubled down on the lie. Emma, honey, we've been doing better financially since you helped us out. We had some extra money and thought Jake needed reliable transportation to find work. I stared at both of them, feeling like I was in some kind of nightmare. Extra money? Dad, 6 weeks ago you were about to lose your house. Where did you get money for a brand new car? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Jake appeared from inside the house, twirling the car keys around his finger like he didn't have a care in the world. Hey, sis. Thanks for the car, he said with a grin that made my blood boil. Thanks for the car? What does that mean? Jake looked confused, glancing between our parents. Didn't you tell her? Tell me what? My voice was getting louder despite my efforts to stay calm. Mom started crying. Emma, we can explain what? Explain what? That's when the truth came spilling out in the most gut-wrenching way possible. Dad sat down heavily on the porch steps and put his head in his hands. We used some of the money you gave us to buy Jake the car. We thought it would help him get back on his feet. The world stopped spinning. Some of the money? How much is some? $22,000, Mom whispered. I couldn't breathe. $22,000 of MY money had been used to buy my unemployed brother a brand new car while I was eating ramen noodles for dinner and had canceled my gym membership to save money. You took my life savings and bought him a car? I was shaking now, pointing at Jake, who had suddenly lost his cocky grin. Emma, we were going to tell you, Dad started. When were you going to tell me? After I spent the next 5 years rebuilding everything I gave up to save your house. Jake, incredibly, had the audacity to speak up. Look, Emma, I really needed a car. How am I supposed to find a job without reliable transportation? I turned on him with a fury I didn't know I possessed. You've had 3 years to find a job while living rent-free in their basement. You think the car is what was holding you back. That's not fair. What's not fair is stealing from your sister who saved our parents' home. We didn't steal anything, Dad said quietly. We're going to pay you back. With what money? The same money you've been promising to save for the last 6 weeks while secretly planning to buy him a car. The worst part wasn't even the money, though that was devastating enough. It was the betrayal. The lies. The fact that they had all sat around my family dinner table, letting me worry about my own financial recovery, while they planned to spend my sacrifice on a gift for the one person in our family who had never sacrificed anything for anyone. I looked at Jake, standing there with his new car keys, and felt something break inside me that I wasn't sure could ever be fixed. But what I discovered when I got home and started digging deeper into their finances made this betrayal look like just the beginning. The real shock was still coming. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. $22,000. More than a third of everything I'd given them. Gone. Spent on a car for someone who had never contributed a single dollar to the family crisis. But something wasn't adding up. A brand new Honda Civic didn't cost $22,000. It cost closer to $25,000 or $26,000. Where had the extra money come from if they were so broke 6 weeks ago? I spent that entire night staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation I'd had with my parents since giving them the money. The nervous glances. The way they'd changed the subject when I mentioned my own financial stress. The fact that Jake suddenly seemed so comfortable, so confident. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the Honda dealership. I told them I was thinking about buying the same model car I'd seen in my parents' driveway and asked to see the paperwork for reference. The salesman was happy to help, and what he told me made my stomach drop to the floor. "Oh, that silver Civic? Yeah, I remember that sale. Cash purchase, $26,500. The whole family was so excited, said it was a graduation gift. Graduation gift? Jake had dropped out of college 3 times. He'd never graduated from anything. Cash purchase. I repeated weakly. Yep, unusual these days. Most people finance, but they paid the whole thing up front. Lucky kid. $26,500 in cash. That meant they hadn't just used part of my money, they'd used almost half of it. But they'd told me $22,000. What happened to the other $4,500? I drove straight to my parents' house, but no one was home. Jake's new car was gone, and their old Ford wasn't in the driveway either. I sat in my car for an hour, trying to make sense of everything, when I noticed their neighbor Mrs. Peterson working in her garden. Mrs. Peterson had lived next door for 15 years and had always been friendly with my family. I walked over to talk to her, hoping she might have some insight into what had been happening at my parents' house lately. "Oh, Emma dear," she said, looking up from her roses. "How wonderful what you did for your parents. They've been telling everyone about their generous daughter who saved their home. Have they said anything else?" I asked carefully. "Well, they seem so much happier lately. And that nice new car for Jake, they said he finally got that job at the marketing company downtown. I'm so glad he's finally getting his life together." My blood ran cold. Job at a marketing company? Yes, didn't you know? They said he's making quite good money now. Enough to help them pay you back quickly, they said. I felt like I was going to be sick. Jake didn't have a job. There was no marketing company. They were lying to the neighbors, probably lying to everyone, about why Jake suddenly had a new car and why their financial situation had improved so dramatically. When I got home, I did something I'd never done before. I opened my laptop and started researching. I looked up my parents' property records online, and what I found there was the final piece of the puzzle that shattered my heart completely. The mortgage had been paid off, just as I'd intended. But there was something else in the public records that I hadn't expected to see. 3 days after the mortgage was satisfied, my parents had taken out a new home equity line of credit against the house. For $30,000. They had used my money to pay off their mortgage, then immediately borrowed against the house I had just saved, and used that money, plus more of my original payment, to buy Jake a car and who knows what else. I sat staring at the computer screen, feeling like my entire world had collapsed. Not only had they betrayed my trust and stolen my money, but they'd put their house right back in jeopardy. The house I had sacrificed everything to save was now being used as collateral for their spending spree. And they'd lied to everyone, me, the neighbors, probably their friends, about all of it. Jake didn't have a job. They weren't in a better financial position. They had just shifted their debt around and used my sacrifice as an opportunity to spend money they didn't have on things they didn't need. The worst part was realizing that this had all been planned. The timing was too perfect, too calculated. They hadn't made a spontaneous decision to buy Jake a car. They had manipulated me into paying off their mortgage so they could access equity to spend on him. I had been played by my own parents, and now I knew exactly what I had to do about it. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, documenting everything I could remember about the past 2 months. Every conversation, every promise, every lie. I wrote down dates, amounts, and the names of everyone who had been part of this deception. By morning, I had a plan. First, I drove to the bank where my parents had gotten their home equity line of credit. I explained to the loan officer that I had information about potential fraud in the application process. It turns out that when you apply for a home equity loan, you have to disclose any recent major financial changes, including receiving large gifts from family members. My parents had failed to mention that they'd just received $52,000 from me, which would have affected their debt-to-income ratio calculations. The loan officer took my information and assured me they would investigate. If my parents had misrepresented their financial situation on the application, the entire loan could be called due immediately. Next, I went to see a lawyer. I'd never sued anyone in my life, but I needed to understand my options. The attorney explained that while I had given the money as a gift, my parents' misrepresentation of how it would be used could constitute fraud. More importantly, since they'd used the gift to immediately put the house back in jeopardy, I might have grounds to demand immediate repayment to protect my investment. The challenge, he explained, is proving that they intended to deceive you from the beginning. Do you have any evidence of their plans to use your money for purposes other than what they told you? That's when I remembered something that made my pulse quicken. Jake's social media. I went home and spent hours scrolling through Jake's Facebook and Instagram accounts. What I found there was a goldmine of evidence. 2 weeks before I'd given my parents the money, 2 weeks before they'd claimed to be surprised by the foreclosure notice, Jake had posted about big changes coming and finally getting the car I deserve. But it got better. 3 days after I'd handed over the check, Jake had posted a picture of himself at the Honda dealership with the caption, "Dreams do come true when you have family who believe in you." The timestamp showed it was posted at 2:47 p.m., less than 72 hours after I'd saved their house. I screenshot everything. Every post, every comment, every piece of evidence that showed this had been planned long before my parents had come to me crying about foreclosure. Then I found the smoking gun. A text message thread that Jake had screenshot and posted to his Instagram story, thinking it would disappear after 24 hours, but I'd saved it. It was a conversation between Jake and someone named Tyler. Jake, getting my car this week, bro. Tyler, how? Thought you were broke, Jake. My sister's paying for it, LOL. Tyler, for real. Jake, parents are gonna tell her they need money for the house, then use it to get me a car. She's such a sucker. She'll totally fall for it, Tyler. That's messed up, man. Jake, whatever. She's got money and I need a car. Fair trade. The timestamp on that conversation was from March 15th, 8 days before my parents had sat me down with their emergency about losing the house. I printed out everything. Every screenshot, every social media post, every public record I could find. Then I made 3 copies of everything and put them in separate folders. While I was organizing my evidence, my phone rang. It was Mom. "Emma, honey, we need to talk. Can you come over for dinner tomorrow night?" My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "What about?" "Well, we want to discuss a repayment plan for the money you gave us. We've been thinking about it, and we want to make things right. Too little, too late." But I played along. "That sounds good, Mom." "What time?" 6 o'clock. "And Emma? Thank you for being so understanding about the car situation. We know it was a shock." Understanding? They had no idea what was coming. After I hung up, I made a few more phone calls. First, to Mrs. Peterson next door. I asked if she'd be willing to write a statement about the conversations she'd had with my parents about Jake's supposed job and their claims about paying me back quickly. She was happy to help. She'd always liked me and was horrified when I told her the truth about Jake's employment status. Then I called my Uncle Mike, my dad's brother. Mike was a straight shooter who'd never liked Jake's entitled attitude. I told him everything that had happened and asked if he'd be willing to be present as a witness when I confronted my parents. He was furious on my behalf and immediately agreed. Finally, I went to the bank and opened a new savings account. I deposited the $1,200 I had left to my name, money I'd been saving from my paychecks since giving away my life savings. It wasn't much, but it was a start toward rebuilding what they'd taken from me. The next evening, as I drove to my parents' house with a folder full of evidence and my uncle following behind me in his truck, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: power. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the naive daughter who'd been taken advantage of. I was someone who had done her homework, gathered her evidence, and was about to demand justice. Jake's Honda was in the driveway, gleaming under the porch light like a monument to their betrayal. But in a few minutes, that car was going to become the centerpiece of the biggest family confrontation of our lives. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought I was the same pushover who would just accept their lies and broken promises. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I walked up to my parents' front door with Uncle Mike right behind me, my folder of evidence clutched tightly in my hands. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they'd be able to hear it, but my resolve was stronger than my nerves. Mom opened the door with her usual fake smile, but it faltered when she saw Uncle Mike. "Mike, what a surprise. We weren't expecting you." "I asked him to come," I said, walking past her into the living room. "We're going to need a witness for this conversation." Dad was sitting in his recliner, and Jake was sprawled on the couch playing on his phone, probably planning his next purchase with my money. They both looked up when they heard the edge in my voice. "A witness?" Dad asked, looking confused. "Emma, what's this about?" "I thought we were going to discuss paying you back." I sat down across from them and opened my folder. "We are going to discuss money, Dad. But first, we're going to discuss the truth." I pulled out the first document, the Honda dealership receipt I'd gotten from my lawyer, who had subpoenaed it after I'd hired him. Jake's car cost $26,500, not $22,000 like you told me. That's lie number one. Jake's phone dropped into his lap. Mom's face went white. "Emma, we can explain. I'm not finished." I pulled out the home equity loan documents. 3 days after I paid off your mortgage, you took out a $30,000 line of credit against the house. The same house I sacrificed everything to save. That's lie number two. Dad started to stand up, but Uncle Mike cleared his throat loudly and Dad sat back down. "And here's my personal favorite," I continued, pulling out the screenshots of Jake's social media posts. "Jake knew about this plan weeks before you came to me crying about foreclosure." I read Jake's text messages out loud, word for word. The room was dead silent except for the sound of my voice reading his own words back to him. "She's such a sucker. She'll totally fall for it." Jake's face had gone from confused to pale to bright red. "Emma, I can explain." "Explain what?" I stood up, my voice echoing through the room. "Explain how you called me a sucker for saving our parents' house? Explain how you planned to steal from me before they even asked for help." Mom was crying now, but I was beyond caring about her tears. These were the same tears she'd used to manipulate me in the first place. "We never meant for it to happen this way," she sobbed. "We just thought, you thought you could lie to me, steal from me, and I'd be too nice to do anything about it." I turned to face all three of them. "Well, you were wrong." I pulled out the bank investigation paperwork. "The bank is reviewing your home equity loan for fraud. When they find out you lied about your financial situation on the application, they can call the entire loan due immediately." Dad's face went ashen. "Emma, you can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious. But that's just the beginning." I pulled out the legal demand letter my attorney had prepared. "You have 30 days to repay the full $52,000 plus interest, or I'm taking you to court for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty." "We don't have $52,000. Mom wailed. "Then you'll sell the car." Jake finally found his voice. "You can't make me sell my car." I turned to look at him, and I could see in his eyes that he finally understood this wasn't going away. "Your car? The car I bought? The car that you planned to trick me into paying for while calling me a sucker behind my back." "I didn't mean you meant every word." I pulled out my phone and showed him his own Instagram post. "Dreams do come true when you have family who believe in you." Posted 3 days after I saved Mom and Dad's house. "You couldn't even wait a week before bragging about scamming your own sister." Uncle Mike spoke up for the first time. "Jake, I've known you since you were born, and I have never been more disgusted by anyone in my life. Emma worked 2 jobs to put herself through school while you sat in this basement doing nothing. She gave up her entire future to save this house, and you turned it into a game. Mike, please, Dad started. No, Robert. I'm not done. Uncle Mike stood up, and I'd never seen him so angry. You raised one daughter who would sacrifice everything for family, and one son who would steal from his sister and laugh about it. Look at what you've created. I pulled out the final document, a copy of the social media evidence I'd already sent to the local news station's investigative reporter. I've also contacted Channel 7 News. They're very interested in doing a story about family financial fraud, especially cases where elderly parents manipulate their successful children. The room exploded. Dad jumped up, Mom started hyperventilating, and Jake started yelling about how I was destroying the family. I'm destroying the family? I stood up and faced all of them. I gave you everything I had. My savings, my retirement, my financial security. I took on debt to save your house. And you used that sacrifice to buy him a toy while lying to everyone about why you could suddenly afford it. Emma, please, Mom begged. We're family. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't lie and manipulate and call each other suckers behind their backs. I gathered my papers and headed toward the door. You have 30 days to make this right. Sell the car, take out loans, ask your precious son to get a job for the first time in his life. I don't care how you do it. I paused at the door and looked back at them one more time. And if you think I'm bluffing about any of this, you clearly don't know me as well as you thought you did. As I walked out, I could hear Jake yelling about how unfair I was being, Mom crying about the family falling apart, and Dad trying to calm everyone down. But none of it mattered anymore. For the first time in 2 months, I felt like I could breathe again. The truth was finally out, and justice was about to be served. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 7 a.m. It was Dad. Emma, we need to talk. Can you please come over? We talked yesterday, Dad. Now it's time for action, not more words. Please, just give us one more chance to make this right. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet them that afternoon. When I arrived, Jake's Honda was gone from the driveway. My heart started pounding. Had they actually taken the first step toward making things right? Inside, the atmosphere was completely different from the night before. Mom's eyes were red and swollen from crying. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. And Jake was nowhere to be seen. Where's Jake? I asked. At the dealership, Dad said quietly. Returning the car. I sat down, hardly daring to believe it. He's returning the car? Mom nodded, unable to speak. Dad continued, we called this morning and explained the situation. Since it's been less than 60 days and he's put fewer than 500 miles on it, they're willing to take it back for a full refund minus a restocking fee. So you'll get back around $25,000? $24,700, Dad confirmed. We're also canceling the home equity line of credit today. We never spent any of that money except for the car. I felt a surge of relief, but I wasn't ready to let my guard down completely. What about the rest of the money I gave you? The other $27,000? Dad pulled out a folder and handed it to me. Inside were bank statements showing that the remaining money from my original payment had been sitting untouched in their savings account. We never spent it, Mom said, her voice barely a whisper. We kept it separate because we always intended to pay you back once we got back on our feet. But you were going to pay me back with what income? You haven't changed your employment situation at all. That's when Dad dropped the biggest surprise of all. I've taken a job. Part-time security guard at the mall. It's not much, but it's something. And your mother is picking up more hours at the grocery store. I stared at both of them. When did this happen? Yesterday, after you left. We spent all night talking about what kind of people we'd become and what kind of parents raise a son who would call his sister a sucker for saving their house. Dad's voice broke. Emma, we failed you. We failed as parents, and we failed as human beings. Mom finally spoke up. We got so caught up in trying to help Jake that we forgot you needed help too. You gave us everything, and instead of being grateful, we immediately started planning how to give some of it away to someone who hadn't earned it. Where is Jake now? After he finishes at the dealership, he's moving out, Dad said. We told him he has 1 week to find somewhere else to live. No more free rent, no more free food, no more enabling his behavior. I was shocked. You're kicking him out? We should have done it years ago, Mom said. Last night, after you left, he started screaming about how this was all our fault for not standing up to you. He called you names I won't repeat and said we were choosing you over him. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. That's when we realized we should have been choosing you all along. You're the one who sacrificed for this family. You're the one who worked hard and made something of yourself. And we rewarded that by stealing from you to enable his laziness. Dad pulled out a check and handed it to me. This is everything. $52,000. We'll pay you back the interest and penalties on your retirement fund withdrawal as soon as we save up enough. I looked at the check, hardly believing this was really happening. What about your mortgage? If you give me back all the money, how will you make your payments going forward? We'll figure it out, Dad said. We should have figured it out ourselves in the first place instead of putting that burden on you. As I sat there holding the check that represented my financial future, I realized something had fundamentally changed in our family dynamic. For the first time in my adult life, my parents were treating me like a person worthy of respect rather than just a source of financial support. Jake returned an hour later with a check from the dealership and the news that he'd already arranged to stay with his friend Tyler, the same friend who'd been part of the original plan to scam me. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look at me. But he was facing consequences for his actions for the first time in his adult life, and that felt like justice enough. 6 months later, my life looks completely different. I've rebuilt my savings account to nearly $15,000, and I'm back on track with my retirement contributions. More importantly, I've learned to value myself the way I should have all along. My relationship with my parents has slowly started to heal, but it's different now. They call before dropping by. They ask about my life instead of just talking about their problems. And they've kept their word about working more hours to become self-sufficient. Dad's security job turned into full-time work, and Mom became a department supervisor at the grocery store. They're proud of their independence in a way they never were before, and they're actually paying me back $50 every month toward the interest and penalties I incurred. It's not much, but it's the principle that matters. Jake, on the other hand, is exactly where I expected him to be. He's burned through 3 different living situations when his friends got tired of supporting him. Last I heard, he was back to sleeping on couches and still hasn't held a job for more than a few weeks at a time. The difference is that it's no longer my parents' problem to solve, and it's definitely not mine. I've started dating someone, a fellow nurse named David, who understands the value of hard work and financial responsibility. When I told him this whole story, his response was perfect. Your family didn't deserve you, but I'm glad you finally realized that you deserve better. The house my parents almost lost is now truly safe. They refinanced to a smaller mortgage payment that they can afford on their combined income, and they've learned to live within their means. More importantly, they've learned the difference between helping someone and enabling them. I think about that night in March when I wrote that check for $52,000, and I barely recognized the person I was then. I was so desperate to be the good daughter, the family hero, that I ignored every red flag and accepted every lie because it felt better than confronting the truth. The truth was that my family had trained me to be their ATM, not their daughter. They valued what I could provide more than who I was as a person. And I had enabled that dynamic by always saying yes, always fixing everything, always putting everyone else's needs before my own. Now I know better. I know that real family doesn't take advantage of your generosity. Real family doesn't lie to you and laugh about it behind your back. And real family definitely doesn't call you a sucker for sacrificing everything to save their house. I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is to stop enabling their worst behaviors. By refusing to be taken advantage of, I forced my parents to grow up and take responsibility for their own lives. And by holding Jake accountable for his actions, I stopped being part of the system that was keeping him from becoming a functional adult. The most important lesson I learned is that you can't love someone into treating you better. You have to demand better treatment by setting boundaries and enforcing consequences when those boundaries are crossed. Looking back on this experience, I realized that the greatest gift my family gave me wasn't the money they eventually returned. It was the wake-up call that forced me to value myself properly. I spent so many years being the responsible one, the helper, the fixer, that I forgot I deserved to be helped and cared for too. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're the one everyone turns to when they need money, support, or solutions, please remember that your worth isn't determined by what you can do for other people. You deserve relationships based on love and respect, not financial convenience. Which part of this story surprised you the most? The fact that my own brother planned to scam me from the beginning, or that my parents actually made things right in the end? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself and demanding the respect you deserve. Remember, you teach people how to treat you. Make sure the lesson you're teaching is the one you want them to learn.